You're watching the legal breakdown. So, Glenn, according to the New York Times, the Manhattan District Attorney Office has signaled to Trump's lawyers that he could face criminal charges for his role in the whole hush money payout situation to Stormy Daniels, which is, quote, the strongest indication yet that prosecutors are nearing indictment of the former president. So, first, how did they reach the conclusion that we're nearing indictment in Alvin Bragg's office?
So the reporting is that the prosecutors have invited Donald Trump to appear before the grand jury. Now, that is a sure sign that they are at the end of the investigation, and that is usually the last investigative step prosecutors will take before asking the grand jury to vote on proposed charges, to indict someone. So, 99 times out of 100, Brian, what we just learned about Donald Trump being invited to appear before the grand jury would signal that he is absolutely going to be indicted. But let's face it, I think we want to brace ourselves because we've been disappointed before. Our justice hopes have been dashed before, particularly when it comes to Alvin Bragg. But, this is a really concrete indication that the next stop should be an indictment for Donald Trump.
Okay, now how often does a district attorney offer a defendant the chance to testify without ultimately seeking charges?
Almost never, because once you're in a position to invite a defendant to appear before the grand jury, obviously you go through the defendant's attorneys, his defense team, and you extend that invitation. It is a sign that you feel like the evidence is there. The evidence is all in. You wait until the very end because in the unlikely event the defendant takes you up on the offer and actually goes into the grand jury and testifies and tries to talk his way out of the charges, you want to make sure you have every investigative fact and detail already kind of in hand so you can really go at the defendant when he's testifying and probably trying to exonerate himself. So ultimately, if Alvin Bragg and his team of prosecutors have progressed to this point, it is a very strong indication that the next stop is an indictment.
Now, you mentioned the unlikely event that Trump would take them up on their offer to testify. Would Trump declining to play any role in this impact Alvin Bragg's decision on whether or not to indict?
Yeah, so that's a good question. People sometimes think that if someone exercises their right to remain silent, if they choose not to testify or not to make a statement to the police or not to make a statement to the jury at their own trial, somehow that can or should be used against them. That is just not the case. Defendants or targets of grand jury investigations have an absolute right to remain silent, not to say anything that might incriminate them. And prosecutors, frankly, ethically speaking, were prohibited from holding that against them. Now, in the court of public opinion, if you're given the opportunity to come in and try to defend yourself before the grand jury and convince the grand jury you did nothing wrong, you committed no crime, and you decline that opportunity, I think in the court of public opinion, I think that tends to hurt.
Well, especially given the fact that that very concept has been promoted by Donald Trump himself. He's the one who came forward and said, when you only the mob invokes the fifth. And so, if we're wondering why people think a certain way about those who choose not to testify, because it might hurt themselves, look no further than the defendant in this very case.
Donald Trump will forever be his own worst enemy.
Yeah.
And, I have maintained all along that the only impediment to a Donald Trump conviction is a Donald Trump indictment. I think once we get into a court before a jury and we begin to lay all of this evidence, at the feet of the jurors of Donald Trump's crimes, you're going to hear a lot of guilty verdicts.
Now, this is the earliest crime that Trump is being investigated for. This happened in 2016. Obviously, the other crimes that we're looking at right now are the insurrection on January 6th, the Mar-a-Lago documents case, which happened after January 6th, telling Brad Raffensperger to find 11,780 votes that didn't exist in Fulton County. That was just after the election. Again, this happened in 2016. So why is this all happening so late here? What was the delay with Alvin Bragg?
It's hard to explain the inexplicable because even before Alvin Bragg, when Cy Vance was the DA for Manhattan, the case could have been pursued. It could have been indicted. It could have been tried back then. And it wasn't. Now, I don't want to mix jurisdictional apples and oranges, but remember, the hush money payments was part of the crimes that Michael Cohen committed.
Right.
And he was investigated by the federal prosecutors in New York, the Southern District of New York U.S. Attorney's Office. That's an arm of the Department of Justice. And, we have since learned some things about the Trump administration really trying to tamp down that investigation. Yes, Michael Cohen admitted his guilt, but the Department of Justice never went after Donald Trump. And some of what we've heard since Trump left office is that perhaps, Donald Trump's corrupt Department of Justice had intervened and made prosecuting that case much more difficult. There may be some spillover to the New York investigation into those same hush money payments, because people may kind of sense that anytime you commit a federal crime, you generally also commit a state crime. So you have two jurisdictions that can be investigating and that can prosecute what is basically the same conduct. And boy, when the federal investigation kind of went south into the whole Michael Cohen, Stormy Daniels conspiracy investigation, that could have had some spillover, and it could have made a New York State investigation a little bit more difficult.
Well, isn't there like a small sliver of justification for not pursuing charges against Trump federally while he was president, given the OLC memo that says you can't prosecute a sitting president?
I think a small sliver is probably a good way to put it. There is a Department of Justice policy. It's called the OLC, Office of Legal Counsel memo, that says basically, we're of the opinion that you can't prosecute a sitting criminal president. Now, mind you, there is no Supreme Court precedent that has ever held that. There is no law. There's nothing in the Constitution. There is not even a lower appellate court decision that has ever announced you can't prosecute a sitting.
But they don't need any of that. I mean, they'll cling on to anything that they could find to give themselves cover to not prosecute Donald Trump for any of his myriad of crimes.
Yeah, and DOJ in essence issued that opinion, and that opinion is, we don't think it's a good idea for you to prosecute our boss, the president. And that really never held much sway with me, and I've always maintained that if we as a government are announcing a president while in office can commit all the crimes he wants with impunity, we can't touch him, that really does kind of move us in the direction of being a banana republic.
Yeah, well, you say that like it's a bad thing when half of our government is looking for exactly that. Glenn, let's finish off with this. What is Trump's defense in this case, with regard to the whole hush money payout stuff?
I can see the defense coming. It's going to be one of the most important witnesses against him is Michael Cohen. And Michael Cohen is a criminal, right? An admitted criminal. He pleaded guilty and served time in prison as a result of the crimes he committed. But you have to take a step back, because that may have some superficial appeal until you realize that many of the crimes Michael Cohen admitted to committing, he committed for the benefit of and at the direction of Donald Trump. So he is what we would generally call a cooperating witness, somebody who took responsibility for his own crimes and is about to testify against his co-conspirator in those crimes. But it will be an all-out attack on the credibility of Michael Cohen, which I think at the end of the day, if the prosecutors are up to the job, and I believe they are, the jury will reject that and they'll hold Donald Trump accountable for his crimes, because it looks like Alvin Bragg has the receipts.
Just on that Michael Cohen bit, I mean, this isn't the first time that a criminal accomplice of another criminal is going to testify. So it's not like everything he's saying is completely useless here, because they look for these type of cooperating witnesses all the time. And those people were involved in the same crime that they're testifying about. So it's not like Michael Cohen's testimony is useless here, or that he's not a trustworthy witness, correct?
Yeah, this is sort of the stock and trade of prosecuting conspiracy cases or cases against a corrupt organization or an enterprise like the Trump organization. Prosecutors will almost always look for co-conspirators that they can flip. Why? Because these are the people who are inside the conspiracy, who can give up their fellow co-conspirators. So it's not at all unusual. And let's remember, Michael Cohen has a whole bunch of receipts himself, because, he paid this $130,000 of hush money out of his own pocket to Stormy Daniels for the benefit of Donald Trump. And then Donald Trump was actually writing and signing reimbursement checks out of the White House after Donald Trump was elected president.
Yeah.
Those are receipts. And they then mischaracterize that as, business expenses, which kind of adds a nice layer of tax fraud to this whole scheme. So, yeah, they will come after Michael Cohen, but he will turn it right back on Donald Trump.
Okay, let's finish off with this. I know you're not in the prediction business, but we had long since believed that an indictment coming down in Fulton County, Georgia was probably the next one that we would see. Do you still think that way? Or given what we're seeing out of the Manhattan DA's office, do you think that that might supersede what we're seeing out of Fulton County, Georgia?
Yeah, you have to compare District Attorney Fani Willis's proclamation that her charging decisions are imminent to what we have now learned coming out of New York, that Donald Trump next week has been offered, or that Donald Trump has been offered next week to appear before the grand jury. If you hold those two things up to one another, just because Alvin Bragg's prosecutors seem to be in the end stage of their investigation and they're going to give Trump the opportunity to testify, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to move right to asking the grand jury to vote out an indictment. They might, but it doesn't necessarily mean it. It just means that both of these investigations in Georgia and in New York are kind of in the final stages, right before they're ready to ask the grand jurors to vote out indictments. Right now, I think it's a push. I think it's anybody's guess as to which indictment drops first. But based on everything we're learning, it feels like we're going to see Donald Trump indicted in not one, but two state jurisdictions.
And as soon as that happens in either one of those jurisdictions, we'll make sure to cover it. So for those watching, if you want to keep on top of this legal news, make sure to follow both of our channels. Links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.